Introduction to Security Policy. In this video, we are going to see about Introduction to Security Policy. Policy defines how security should be implemented. This includes the proper configurations on computer systems and networks as well as physical security measures. An important part of any organization's approach to implement security are policies, standards, guidelines, procedures. The approaches are established in detail on what users and administrators should do to maintain the security of the systems and network. Policies. Policies are high-level, broad statements of what the organization wants to accomplish. They are made by management when laying out the organization's position on some issue. Standards. Standards are mandatory elements regarding the implementation of a policy. They are accepted specifications providing specific details on how a policy is to be enforced. Guidelines. Guidelines are recommendations relating to a policy. Procedures. Procedures are the step-by-step instruction on how to implement policies in the organization. The constant monitoring of the network and the periodic review of the relevant documents are part of the process that is the operational model. Operational model is applied to policies. This process result is known as the policy life cycle. This operational process roughly consists of 4 steps: plan, implement, monitor, evaluate. The first step is to plan for security in the organization. In first step, users develop the policies, procedures, and guidelines that will be implemented and design the security components that will protect their network. In second step, user implements the plans. In third step, user monitors to ensure that both hardware and software as well as the policies, procedures, and guidelines are effective in securing their systems. In final step, user evaluates the effectiveness of the security measure. After evaluating their security posture, user need to begin again with step 1 to continue their cyclic process. Security policy. The security policy defines the technical requirement for security on computer systems and network equipments. It defines how a system or network administrator should configure a system with regard to security. The audit section of the security policy should define the types of events to be audited on all systems. Normally, security policies require the following events to be audited: logins, logouts, failed access to files or system objects, remote access that is successful or failed, privileged actions, those performed by administrators, both success and failures. System events such as shutdowns and reboots should also capture the following information: user ID, date and time, process ID if there is one, action performed, success or failure of the event. The security policy should specify how long the audit records should be kept, how they should be stored. The security policy should define the type of security device to be used on such connection. Most often, a firewall is the appropriate device. The security policy should specify where security programs that look for malicious code, such as viruses, rootkits, backdoors, ought to be placed. Appropriate locations include file servers, desktop systems, and electronic mail servers. The policy also requires updates of the signatures for such security programs on a periodic basis, such as monthly basis. Best practices in security policy. In this animation, we are going to learn about best practices in security policy. Establishing a security policy is the starting point in designing a secure computer network. It is essential that a set of minimum security requirements to be gathered, formalized, and included as the basis of their security policy. This security policy must be enforceable by their organization and will create an additional cost to running and monitoring their network. The several best practices related to the production of such a document. First best practice: perform a threat analysis and risk analysis for their organization to determine the level of security that must be implemented. First, identify all the threats to the computer and network. Second, determine threat categories. Third, perform the risk assessment. Fourth, recommend action. Risk assessment should be performed by constructing a consequence matrix versus likelihood matrix as shown in the figure. For each threat, construct a likelihood or consequence table. The likelihood rating for a threat can use categories such as A is equal to remote, B is equal to unlikely, C is equal to likely, D is equal to highly likely, and E is equal to near certainty. The consequence rating of the threat should use a point system where block 1 in the table is equal to 0 to 1 points, block 2 is equal to 2 to 3 points, block 3 is equal to 4 to 6 points, block 4 is equal to 7 to 9 points, block 5 is equal to 9 to 11 points. Points are assigned based upon their subjective assessment of a compromise in security as an impact on functioning of their organization and data compromise. For instance, 5 points is equal to organization grinds to a halt, loss of mission critical system. 3 point is equal to some applications don't function, loss of non-mission critical systems, but the organization can function. 0 points, no loss of function. Data compromise points may be assigned as, for example, 2 points is equal to compromise of sensitive data to people outside the organization. 1 point is equal to compromise of sensitive data to people internal to the organization that should not have access. 0 point is equal to no compromise of data. This type of matrix will immediately highlight where to emphasize security. Also, a form should be created and filled out that identifies the threat, gives solutions to the threat, shows the likelihood of the threat, that is A, B, etc., gives the impact of the threat on an organization's function and data, shows the consequences of a compromise, Second best practice: define a security policy for the entire site and use it as a guide for the network security architecture. Define a policy that includes sections for confidentiality, integrity, availability, accountability. Confidentiality: the system must ensure the confidentiality of sensitive information by controlling access to information, services, and equipment. Only personnel who have the proper authorization and need to know can have access to systems and data. The system must include features and procedures to enforce access control policies for all information, services, and equipment comprising the system. Integrity: the system must maintain the integrity, that is, absence of unauthorized and undetected modification of information and software while these are processed, stored, and transferred across a network or publicly accessible transmission media. Each file or data collection in the system must have an identifiable source throughout its life cycle. Also, the system must ensure the integrity of its mission-critical equipment. Automated and/or manual safeguards must be used to detect and prevent inadvertent or malicious destruction or modification of data. Availability. The system must protect against denial of service threats. Protection must be proportionate to the operational value of the services and the information provided. This protection must include protection against environment threats such as loss of power and cooling. Third best practice. Create a plan for implementing their security policy. Once a security policy is established, an implementation plan should be created. Incremental stage infrastructure improvements and new hires, if any, will help management plan for expenses and create a timetable for implementation. The implementation plan should include the following steps. Defining implementation guidelines. These guidelines should specify the personnel to receive security alarms and what action is to be taken. Chains of commands for incident escalation and reporting requirements. Educating staff, customers, etc. about the security policy. Purchasing any needed hardware or software and hiring any needed personnel. Installing and testing equipment or software. Formulate security policy. Now we are going to see about formulating security policy. Guidelines for information security policy. Guidelines helps to provide a list of suggestions on how user can do things better. Guidelines are similar to standards but are more flexible and are not usually mandatory. Comparison between standards, guidelines, and procedures are shown in the following table. Category, characteristics. Standards. Specify the use of specific technologies in a uniform way. Improve efficiency, are usually mandatory. Accomplish consistency and uniformity. Guidelines are similar to standards but more flexible and not usually mandatory. Can be used to define how standards should be developed or to guarantee adherence to general security policies. Include NIST Computer Security Resource Center, NSA Security Configuration Guides, Common Criteria, and others. Procedures are usually required or the lowest level of the policy chain. Provide detailed steps used to perform specific tasks. Provide the steps required to implement the policies, standards, and guidelines, are also known as practices. Security policy roles and responsibilities. In any organization, if senior management such as the CEO that is always ultimately responsible for everything. Typically, senior management only oversees the development of a security policy. The creation and maintenance of a security policy is usually delegated to the people in charge of IT or security operations. Sometimes the senior security or IT management personnel, such as the Chief Security Officer (CSO), the Chief Information Officer (CIO), or the Chief Information Security Officer (CISO), will have the expertise to create the policy. Sometimes they will delegate it, and sometimes it will be a bit of both strategies. But the senior security person is always intimately involved in the development and maintenance of security policy. Guidelines can provide a framework for policy decision making. Everyone else who is involved in the security policy has the duty to abide by it. Many policy statements will include language that refers to a potential loss of employment for violation of the policy. Security awareness. Technical, administrative, and physical controls can all be defeated without the participation of the end-user community. An effective computer security awareness and training program requires proper planning, implementation, maintenance, and periodic evaluation. In general, a computer security awareness and training program should encompass the following 7 steps. Identify program scope, goals, and objectives. Identify training staff. Identify target audiences. Motivate management and employee. Administer the program. Maintain the program. Evaluate the program. Step 1. Identify program scope, goals, and objectives. The scope of the program should provide training to all types of people who interact with IT systems. Because users need training that relates directly to their use of particular systems, they need to supplement a large organization-wide program with more system-specific programs. Step 2. Identify training staff. It is important that trainers have sufficient knowledge of computer security issues, principles, and techniques. It is also vital that they know how to communicate information and ideas effectively. Step 3. Identify target audiences. Not everyone needs the same degree or type of computer security information to do their job. A computer security awareness and training program that distinguishes between groups of people presents only the information that is needed by the particular audience and omits irrelevant information will have the best results. Step 4. Motivate management and employees. To successfully implement an awareness and training program, it is important to gain the support of management and employees. Consider using motivational techniques to show management and employees how their participation in a computer security and awareness program will benefit the organization. Step 5. Administer the program. Several important considerations for administering the program include visibility, selection of appropriate training methods, topics, and materials and presentation techniques. Step 6. Maintain the program. Users should make an effort to keep abreast of changes in computer technology and security requirements. A training program that meets the needs of an organization today may become ineffective when the organization starts to use a new application or changes its environment, such as by connecting to the internet. Step 7. Evaluate the program. An evaluation should attempt to ascertain how much information is retained, to what extent computer security procedures are being followed, and the general attitudes toward computer security. A successful IT security program consists of the following: developing IT security policy that reflects business needs tempered by known risk, informing users of their IT security responsibilities as documented in agency security policy and procedures, establishing processes for monitoring and reviewing the program. Users should focus security awareness and training on the entire population of the organization. An awareness program should begin with an effort that user can deploy and implement in various ways and be aimed at all levels of the organization, including senior and executive managers. The effectiveness of this effort usually determines the effectiveness of the awareness and training program and how successful the IT security program will be. Issues in security policy implementation. In this animation, we are going to learn about issues in security policy implementation. There are many serious problems preventing information security policies from being implemented, even though these policies may have been written with the best of intentions. For example, an access control policy at a bank need to be careful and on one hand need to satisfy general laws and regulations. Need to keep fraud and other problems minimum and allow participation in interbank networks. On the other hand, this policy must also be simple and easy to use and not be so heavy that workers are prevented from efficiently doing their work, and not be so burdensome that staff at customer organizations accessing the bank's system is encouraged to do business elsewhere. So the best steps to follow to avoid implementation problems such as failure to explicitly define long-term implementation, full cost analysis not employed, user training and acceptance efforts not undertaken, discovery of unforeseen implementation, communications gap between technologist and management, failure to explicitly define long-term implementation. While keeping presentations about proposed policies both short and to the point is certainly desired, sometimes information security specialists go overboard with this objective. They may then leave out the important long-term implications of adopting a specific policy. Management may later be disappointed to discover that these implications contradict or are otherwise in conflict with other organizational objectives. This description of the problem, of course, assumes that the information security specialist making a request for approval has himself or herself thought these long-term implications. Certainly, there are many cases where this has not been done before a request is made of management. Either way, the net result is the same. Management is angry or upset because they feel as though they have been led through a bait and switch fraudulent advertisement process where they thought they agreed to X, but really what they got was X, Y, and Z. This may have been the experience of Facebook when it came to light that third parties could do automated data mining employing the personal data supplied by Facebook users. While the privacy policy originally allowed Facebook to gather information about users from other sources such as blogs, instant messaging services, and other Facebook users, this policy was later changed. The revised policy allowed users to remove content about themselves and to further limit the visibility of their own personal information. Full cost analysis not employed. With the severe economic pressure that so many IT shops are facing these days, it can be tempting to only request the first step in a long implementation process. For example, next year's budget proposal in support of a newly adopted policy may request only the purchase of new security software and training for operations staff to use that same software. The requested budget may fail to mention the cost to handle frequent fixes and patches, ongoing maintenance charges for the software, end-user training required in order to properly utilize the software, etc. Management is never going to be happy to hear that there are hidden costs, and this unhappiness may mean that the whole project gets dropped midway across the stream toward implementation. For example, management is increasingly looking at TCO, or the total cost of ownership. Management really needs to know the long-term costs and benefits associated with a proposed policy. This includes the implications for many things, including production system downtime to install a new security system, future upgrade and scalability expenses associated with a new system, and the impact of the new system on response time. It is thus advisable that the requester perform this research before a management request is made. The requester should have identified the technology that can be used to implement a policy before that policy is proposed. This will give the requester an opportunity to talk with the vendor about full lifecycle costs as well as the other implications of adopting a particular approach to improve security or privacy. User training and acceptance efforts not undertaken. Failure to convince those who will be affected by a policy that the new policy is indeed in their best interest is more likely going to be a serious problem. As much as those responsible for meeting a deadline might like to autocritically dictate that such and such a policy will be adopted by everyone, users need to be respected and convinced that the new policy is in their best interest and that it also protects the organization as a whole, and then they will be much more likely to go along with a changed operating environment. Discovery of unforeseen implementation conflicts. Failure to research the cultural, ethical, economic, and operational implications of the policy implementation process is often a problem. This is particularly serious in multinational organizations where the local way of doing things may be at great variance from a newly adopted policy. For example, while consolidation of data centers may seem like a good idea from a cost containment standpoint, and it may also provide new opportunities to consistently apply privacy measures to all human resources data from various countries, such an approach may run afoul of so-called transborder data flow laws. More specifically, privacy laws in Western Europe may prevent human resource data from leaving the country where it is now stored, because then the government's ability to oversee and regulate this data would be eliminated. While there are some workarounds such as the safe harbor agreements that permit the international movement of such data, this example eliminates what may become an unforeseen conflict blocking the implementation of a particular policy. Communications gap between technologists and management. The communications gap here is between the technical and administrative staff who are often running around handling problems, sometimes in crisis mode, and talking with each other. These people don't necessarily discuss their activities with the top managers who approved a policy, who in turn may be occasionally talking to middle managers. This gap in internal communications can be especially problematic if the Chief Information Security Officer, the Chief Privacy Officer, or some other middle manager who ordinarily would be expected to act as a bridge is non-technical in his or her orientation. Risk management. In this video, let us see the application of risk management. Risk management is the process of identifying vulnerabilities and threats to an organization's resources and assets and deciding what countermeasures, if any, to take to reduce the level of risk to an acceptable level based on the value of the asset to the organization. Countermeasures includes firewall, antivirus software, access control, authentication system, biometrics, GOTS. The following figure shows the flowchart for risk management. Risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and mitigating risk. An organization has many individuals who are responsible for accepting the given risk for given applications. These individuals include the president, head of the business unit, and the information owner. The overall risk to an organization is dependent on the following attributes: the qualitative, that is, effect of loss, and quantitative, that is, monetary value of the assets, the likelihood of attack-based threats, the business impact if the threat is realized. The vulnerability level is the inverse of the capability of the security architecture to protect an organization's assets. If the security controls are weak, then exposure level will be high. This linked with opportunity can spell disaster. The likelihood of an exploit and vulnerability to the data or resource depend on the following attributes, which are difficult to predict: assets value, attractiveness to adversaries, the technology changes, network and processor speed, software exploits. All these factors may have a large amount of uncertainty as to the accuracy of the predictions associated with them. Risk management is both a skill and a task that all managers do, either deliberately or intuitively. It can be simple or complex depending on the size of the project or business and the amount of risk inherent in an activity. Risk analysis. Now let us see the process of risk analysis. Effective security planning includes a careful risk analysis. A risk is a potential problem that the system or its users may experience. Some of the risks are as follows: a loss associated with an event, the likelihood that the event will occur, the degree to which user can change the outcome. A loss associated with an event. The event must generate effect, compromised security, lost time and diminished quality, lost money, lost control, lost understanding, and so on. This loss is called the risk impact. The likelihood that the event will occur. There is a probability of occurrence associated with each risk measured from 0, that is impossible, to 1, that is certain. When the risk probability is 1, users have to say they have a problem. The degree to which user can change the outcome. User must determine what can do avoid the impact or at least its effects. Risk control involves a set of actions to reduce or eliminate the risk. Many of the security control are examples of risk control. In general, there are 3 strategies for risk reduction are: avoid the risk by changing requirements for security or other system characteristics. Transferring the risk by allocating the risk to other systems, people, organizations, or assets, or by buying insurance to cover any financial loss should the risk become a reality. Assuming the risk by accepting and controlling it will avail resources and preparing to deal with the loss if it occurs. Thus, costs are associated not only with the risk potential impact but also with reducing it. Risk leverage is the difference in risk exposure divided by the cost of reducing the risk. In other words, risk leverage is risk exposure before reduction minus risk exposure after reduction, the whole divided by cost of risk reduction. If the leverage value of a proposed action is not high enough, then user need to look for alternative but less costly actions or more effective reduction techniques. Risk analysis is the process of examining a system and its operational context to determine possible exposures and the potential harm they can cause. Thus, the first step in a risk analysis is to identify and list all exposures in the computing system of interest. By following well-defined steps, user can analyze their security risks in computing systems, identify assets, determine vulnerabilities, estimate likelihood of exploitation, compute expected annual loss, survey applicable controls and their costs, project annual savings of control. Different organizations take slightly different approaches, but the basic activities are still the same. For example, Army used its Operation Security Guidelines during the war. The guidelines involves 5 steps. Identify the critical information to be protected, analyze the threats, analyze the vulnerabilities, assess the risk, Apply countermeasures. The steps are similar, but their details are always tailored to the particular situation at hand. For this reason, it is useful to use someone else's risk analysis process as a framework, but it is important to change it to match their own situation. Risk assessment. In this video, we are going to see about risk assessment. Risk assessment is an objective analysis of the effectiveness of the current security controls that protect an organization's assets and a determination of the probability of losses to those assets. Risk assessment comprises the following steps: project definition, project preparation, data gathering, administrative data gathering, technical data gathering, physical data gathering, risk analysis, risk mitigation, risk reporting and resolution. Project definition. The scoping of any project includes a clear understanding of the cost and time frame of the engagement. The security risk assessment team leader needs to ensure that the project budget and time constraints are well understood. A project plan not only documents the budget and time constraints, but breaks down the overall project into manageable tasks and allocates resources to those tasks. Project preparation. Based on the scope of the security risk assessment project identified in Step 1, the team leadership needs to ensure that adequate preparations are performed prior to entering the data gathering step. Preparation includes team preparation and project preparation. Team preparation comprises the selection of the security risk assessment team and the introduction of the team to the organization to be assessed. Data gathering. The data gathering phase is typically performed on site and results in the collection of information concerning the effectiveness of the current administrative data gathering, physical data gathering, technical data gathering. The security risk assessment team will review the administrative controls through the collection, review, and analysis of available policies and procedures, as well as observation and interviews with staff. The physical security controls will be assessed through techniques such as observation, testing, and analysis. The technical security controls will be reviewed through technical analysis, testing, and review of logs. Risk analysis. The risk analysis phase involves a review of the data gathering and an analysis of the resulting risk to the organization. During this phase, the security risk assessment team must determine asset values, system criticality, likely threats, and the existence of vulnerabilities based on the data gathered. Several elements of the risk analysis phase are considered key concepts with security risk assessments. These include assets, threats, vulnerabilities, security risk. Assets. Assets are the items considered valuable by the organization. Assets are an important element of a security risk assessment for several reasons. First reason is the enumeration of assets helps to scope the security risk assessment. Second, the valuation of assets helps to determine the countermeasures employed. A countermeasure is simply a control, that is activity, technique or technology, that reduces the possible loss to an organization's assets. The following table shows the key concepts of asset valuation and countermeasure summary. Key concepts. Definition. Assets. Resources, data, or other item of value to the organization. Assets enumeration. A listing or grouping of assets under assessment. Assets enumeration helps to scope the information security assessment. Asset valuation. The placement of a relative or dollar value on each asset. Asset valuation is useful in determining potential loss and countermeasure selection. Threat agents and threats. Threats and threat agents are inextricably linked in that it is the threat agent that causes a threat to happen. A threat agent is the entity that may cause a threat to happen. The threat agents and threats are important elements of the information security risk assessment because it helps to determine the scope of the vulnerability of the system being assessed. A list of possible threat agents is provided below for illustrative purposes. Nature, employees, malicious hackers, industrial spies, foreign government spies. A threat is an undesired event that may result in the loss, disclosure, or damage to an organizational asset. A partial list of threats is given below. Errors and omissions, fraud and theft. Terms of threats and countermeasure. The following table shows the terms of threats and countermeasure summary. Key concepts, definition. Valid threat. Threats that are considered relevant for a specific security risk assessment. Threat agent. The entity that may cause a threat to happen. Threat environment. Determining the physical, geographical, and other aspects of the organization's system helps to determine the scope and extent of applicable threats. Vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is a flaw or oversight in an existing control that may possibly allow a threat agent to exploit it to gain unauthorized access to organizational assets. These are important elements of a security risk assessment because they are instrumental in determining existing and residual risk. When assessing vulnerabilities in the system, it is useful to categorize the vulnerabilities according to administrative vulnerabilities, physical vulnerabilities, technical vulnerabilities. Key concepts, definition. Vulnerabilities. A flaw or oversight in an existing control that may allow a threat agent to exploit it to gain unauthorized access to organizational assets. Administrative vulnerabilities. Gaps in policies, procedures, or security activities, for example, missing acceptable use policies, gaps in termination procedures, or the lack of independence in security testing. Physical vulnerabilities. Gaps in physical, geographical, personnel, or utility provisioning controls, examples, holes in the fence line, location in a flight path, lack of background checks for sensitive positions, and lack of redundant power supplies. Technical vulnerabilities. Gaps in the logical control in the organization's systems, example, misconfigured routers, backdoors in programs, and weak passwords. Let us see another process of risk mitigation and risk reporting and resolution in next video. Risk assessment. In this video, we are going to see about risk mitigation and risk reporting and resolution. Risk mitigation. Based on the risk defined in the risk analysis step, the team must develop recommendations for safeguards to reduce the identified risk to an acceptable level. Several elements of the risk mitigation step are considered key concepts with security risk assessments. These include safeguards, residual risk. Safeguards. A safeguard may prevent, detect, or minimize the potential loss to an organization's assets. For this reason, safeguards are generally characterized as preventive, detective, or corrective measures. Key concepts, definition. Preventive. Control designed to deter undesirable events from happening. Example, access controls, door locks, and security training. Detection. Control that identify conditions that indicate that an undesirable event has happened. Examples, audit logs, security testing and intrusion detection system. Corrective controls designed to correct damage caused by undesirable events. Examples: security guards, termination policies, and file recovery. Security risk. Security risk remains after implementation of recommended safeguards. Residual security risk is an important element of information security risk assessments for several reasons. First and foremost, residual risk is a security risk that the organization will inherit when safeguards are implemented. Second, the security professional and the organization's management must clearly understand that there is no such thing as 100% security or 0% residual security risk. Even if the organization implements every one of the information security professionals' recommendations, the organization still has some residual security risk to its assets. Risk reporting and resolution. The final phase of a security risk assessment is the risk reporting and resolution phase. The final risk assessment report should provide clear information for the executive, management, and technical personnel. The following table shows the explanation of key terms of risk summary, key concepts, definition. Risk resolution. The decision by senior management of how to resolve the risk presented to them. Risk reduction. The reduction of risk to the organization to an acceptable level through the adoption of additional security controls or improvement of existing control. Risk acceptance. The deliberate decision by senior management to accept an identified risk based on the business objectives of the organization. Risk transference. The contractual transfer of risk to another organization through outsourcing or insurance. Identification of assets. In this video, we are going to learn about identification of assets. There are many assets within an organization that have value. Risk managers, in order to perform their duties properly, need to identify those assets that are critical to the organization. The identification of various assets to an organization or person is the first step in the risk analysis process. Its purpose in identifying the various assets and loss impacts in threefold. Determine critical assets requiring protection. Identify undesirable events and expected impacts. Value or prioritize assets based on the consequence of their loss. There are several givens when determining assets. Not all assets and activities warrant the same level of protection. Not all assets are important over other items. Not all assets have the same value to different persons in the organization. Not all assets are absolutely essential to the organization, its well-being, or to its profitability or survival. Not all assets are ever identified within a larger organization. The cost of reducing risk to an asset must be reasonable in relation to its overall value. The value of assets is not necessarily assessed in dollars. A potential loss impact to an asset may be stated in terms of human lives, organization interest and survival, or national interest, that is political and economic. Assets, no matter what form they take, have value. There are several conditions associated with the value of information. Risk managers should keep these conditions in mind as they go about looking at the different types of assets. The conditions associated with value include exclusive possession. Is the asset only found within this organization? Utility. In order to complete a mission, program, or project, is the asset so critical that completion or success would not be obtained without it? Assets come in many forms, but they can be categorized into 5 general areas: people, activities and operations, information, facilities, equipment and materials. Sub-areas of people is as follows: people, American citizens, foreign nationals, government personnel, government personnel, government contractors, government contractors, commercial contractors or vendors, commercial contractors or vendors, military personnel, military personnel, dependents, dependents, visitors, visitors. Sub-areas of activity and operations is as follows: activities and operations, personnel protective service, conduct of sensitivity training, communication or networking, conduct of sensitive negotiations, intercepting of adversary operation or activities against organization, intelligence collection or analysis, that is defensive posture of organization, sensitive movements of operations or personnel or property, research, development, testing and evaluation, that is RDT and E, and sensitive technology, production of sensitive technology, protection of nuclear or biological or chemical materials, protection of weapons, explosives and equipment, other. Sub-areas of information is as follows: information, government classified and classified, sensitive compartmentalized information, system design, top secret, intellectual property, secret, patents and copyrighted information, confidential, system capabilities and vulnerabilities, sensitive methods, techniques and procedures, sensitive financial data, other, sensitive unclassified. Sub-areas of facilities is as follows: facilities, domestic, foreign or overseas, organizational headquarters, embassies, legations and consulates, field offices or administrative buildings, military bases, training facilities, other government sites, contractor facilities, organizational headquarters, storage facilities, direct support facilities, R&D laboratories, industry or manufacturing sites, power plants, residences, parking facilities, aircraft hangars, residences, military bases, communication facilities. Sub-areas of equipment and materials is as follows: equipment and materials, transportation equipment or vehicles, maintenance equipment, operational equipment, that is office or field, communications equipment, security equipment, weapons, automated information systems equipment. Identification of threats to assets. Now, let us see about identification of threats to assets. The ultimate goal of risk identification is to assess the circumstances and setting of each information asset to reveal any vulnerabilities. Armed with a properly classified inventory, user can assess potential weaknesses in each information asset, a process known as threat identification. Any organization typically faces a wide variety of threats. If user assume that every threat can and will attack every information asset, then the project scope becomes too complex. To make the process less unwieldy, each step in the threat identification and vulnerability identification processes is managed separately and then coordinated at the end. At every step, the manager is called on to exercise good judgment and draw on experience to make the process function smoothly. Identify and prioritize threats and threat agent. Each of these threats a unique challenge to information security and must be handled with specific controls that directly address the particular threat and the threat agent's attack strategy. Before threats can be assessed in the risk identification process, however, each threat must be further examined to determine its potential to affect the targeted information asset. In general, this process is referred to as threat assessment. Posing the following questions can help user to understand the threat and its potential effects on an information. Threats examples: act of human error or failure, accidents, employee mistakes, compromises to intellectual property, piracy, copyright infringement, deliberate acts of espionage or trespass, unauthorized access and or data collection, deliberate acts of information extortion, blackmail for information disclosure, deliberate acts of sabotage or vandalism, destruction of systems or information, deliberate acts of theft, illegal confiscation of equipment or information, deliberate software attacks, viruses, worms, macros, denial of service, deviations in quality of service by service providers, power and WAN quality of service issues from service providers, forces of nature, fire, flood, earthquake, lighting, technical hardware failure or errors, equipment failure, technical software failure or errors, bugs, code problems, unknown loopholes, technological obsolescence, antiquated or outdated technologies. Risk calculation. In this video, we are going to see about the application of risk calculation. Countermeasures against risk. Risk is the probability that the system's assets will be damaged or abused by the threats that exploit the vulnerabilities. Threats are elements from various sources that can exploit vulnerabilities and that increase risk. Assets can be tangible, such as hardware or software, or intangible, such as goodwill and customers' confidence. Threats can be initiated by threat agents. A common threat agent for IT systems is people. They can accidentally or intentionally exploit vulnerabilities of a system to impact an IT system. In order to manage risk, user deploys countermeasures, that is controls to a system to reduce the vulnerabilities. The decision to deploy certain countermeasures to reduce the vulnerabilities and hence reduce risk lies solely on the information who bears all consequences arising from the risk. The primary components that make up network infrastructure are routers, firewalls, and switches. They act as the gatekeepers guarding for servers and applications from attacks and intrusions. An attacker may exploit poorly configured network devices. Common vulnerabilities include weak default installation settings, wide open access controls, and devices lacking the latest security patches. Top network level threats and its countermeasures include information gathering, sniffing, spoofing, session hijacking, denial of service. Information gathering. In this video, we are going to see about information gathering. Network devices can be discovered and profiled in much the same way as other types of systems. Attackers usually start with port scanning. After they identify open ports, they use banner grabbing and enumeration to detect device types and to determine operating system and application versions. Armed with this information, an attacker can attack known vulnerabilities that may not be updated with security patches. Countermeasures to prevent information gathering include configure routers to restrict their responses to footprinting requests. configure operating systems that host network software, for example software firewalls, to prevent footprinting by disabling unused protocols and unnecessary ports. Sniffing. In this video, we are going to see about sniffing. Sniffing is the act of monitoring traffic on the network for data such as plaintext passwords or configuration information. With a simple packet sniffer, an attacker can easily read all plaintext traffic. Also, attackers can crack packets encrypted by lightweight hashing algorithms and can decipher the payload that user considered to be safe. The sniffing of packets requires a packet sniffer in the path of the server or client communication. Countermeasures to help prevent sniffing include: use strong physical security and proper segmenting of the network. This is the first step in preventing traffic from being collected locally. Encrypt communication fully, including authentication credentials. This prevents sniffed packets from being usable to an attacker. SSL and IPsec, that is Internet Protocol Security, are the examples of encryption solutions. Spoofing. In this video, we are going to see about spoofing. Spoofing is a means to hide one's true identity on the network. To create a spoofed identity, an attacker uses a fake source address that does not represent the actual address of the packet. Spoofing may be used to hide the original source of an attack or to work around network access control lists, ACLs, that are in place to limit host access based on source address rules. Although carefully crafted spoofed packets may never be tracked to the original sender, a combination of filtering rules prevents spoofed packets from originating from your network, allowing you to block obviously spoofed packets. Countermeasures to prevent spoofing include: filter incoming packets that appear to come from an internal IP address at user perimeter. Filter outgoing packets that appear to originate from an invalid local IP address. Session hijacking. In this video, we are going to see about session hijacking, also known as man-in-the-middle attacks. Session hijacking deceives a server or a client into accepting the upstream host as the actual legitimate host. Instead, the upstream host is an attacker's host that is manipulating the network, so the attacker's host appears to be the desired destination. Countermeasures to help prevent session hijacking include: use encrypted session negotiation, use encrypted communication channels, stay informed of platform patches to fix TCP/IP vulnerabilities such as predictable packet sequences. Denial of service. In this video, we are going to see about denial of service. Denial of service denies legitimate users access to a server or services. The SYN flood attack is a common example of a network-level denial of service attack. It is easy to launch and difficult to track. The aim of the attack is to send more requests to a server that it can handle. The attack exploits a potential vulnerability in the TCP/IP connection establishment mechanism and floods a server's pending connection queue. Countermeasures to prevent denial of service include: apply the latest service packs, harden the TCP/IP stack by applying the appropriate registry settings to increase the size of the TCP connection queue, decrease the connection establishment period, and employ dynamic backlog mechanisms to ensure that the connection queue is never exhausted. Use a network intrusion detection system (IDS) because these can automatically detect and respond to SYN attacks. After analysis of risk from threats, calculation or control assessment need to be done by translating the important terms into representative values. The risk calculator's formulas break down as: risk is equal to probability of occurrence into business impact, or risk is equal to reproducibility plus exploitability into damage potential plus affected users plus discoverability. The numbers placed in each column are subjective. This calculator with the numbers assigned are example values. Threat is equal to remote cybercriminal. Threat agent or action is equal to remote access to customer payment data using various tools and techniques. Reproducibility is equal to 3. Exploitability is equal to 3. Damage potential is equal to 3. Affected users is equal to 3. Discoverability is equal to 3. Entering some example values in the calculator, this will arrive at the result. What it means: risk score 1 to 18. Low risk, consider accepting this risk. Risk score 19 to 36. Medium risk, potential for moderate damage to business information assets, finances, reputation, employees or customers. Mitigate risk as soon as reasonable given other security challenges. Risk score 37 to 54, which means high risk, potential for serious damage to business's information assets, finances, reputation, employee or customers. Plan to mitigate risk immediately. So far, this provides methods to collect current state risk information and its calculation. Incident handling. Now let us see about the animation of incident handling. Security incident handling is a set of continuous processes governing the activities before, during, and after a security incident occurs. Security incident handling begins with the planning and preparing for the resources and developing proper procedures to be followed, such as the escalation and security incident response procedures. The 6 stages of incident handling are: preparation, identification or detection of incident handling, containment or responding to an incident, eradication or responding to an incident, recovery or recovering from an incident, lessons learned or building an incident response team. Stage 1. Preparation. Preparation activities are concerned with defining how to handle an incident once it has occurred. This stage includes defining roles and responsibilities for managing incidents, defining and testing the procedures for incident handling. In addressing the issue of roles and responsibilities, larger organizations should consider establishing a computer security incident response team. This team will then be responsible for coordinating incident response activities across the organization, such as ensuring that potential incidents are reported, analyzed, and responded to in an appropriate manner. The detailed responsibilities of the team and the associated authority should be clearly documented by using terms of reference or some similar mechanism. Stage 2. Identification or detection of an incident. The identification phase includes a variety of activities including recognition of an incident, understanding and measuring its likely impact, collection and analysis of data, and notifying the appropriate personnel. The identification phase should also evaluate and prioritize alternatives for managing the incident. The main output of the identification phase is a recommended plan of action for containment. User needs to remain calm even in the most stressful situations. Their calm will reflect on others and they will also calm down. The next step is to take their own time and not hurry. If user assess the situation and think a second before they act, it could save their costly mistakes in the end. The third step is to become a good record keeper and take good notes. When an incident occurs, users need to answer who, what, when, where, why, and how. These questions are very important in allowing user to assess the situation accurately. Stage 3. Containment or responding to an incident. Containment activities aim to ensure that the incident in question spreads no further. Examples of containment actions might include taking a server infected with malicious code offline or programming network intrusion detection engines to prevent certain network flows to the outside world. In real-life situations, data collection and analysis continues throughout the containment phase and is used to continually cross-check the action plan for containment. Depending on the nature of the attack and the organization's technical capabilities, ad hoc controls can sometimes gain valuable time to devise a more permanent control strategy. Other containment strategies include the following: disabling compromised user accounts, reconfiguring a firewall to block the problem traffic, temporarily disabling the compromised process or service, taking down the conduit application or server, for example the email server, stopping all computers and networking devices. Stage 4. Eradication or responding to an incident. After an incident has been contained, eradication may be necessary to eliminate components of the incident, such as deleting malware and disabling breached user accounts, as well as identifying and mitigating all vulnerabilities that were exploited. During eradication, it is important to identify all affected hosts within the organization so that they can be remediated. For some incidents, eradication is either not necessary or is performed during recovery. Users want to identify and mitigate the vulnerabilities that caused the incident and remove any malicious code, inappropriate materials, or other components as a part of their steps to eradicate the damage. Stage 5. Recovery or recovering from incidents. List the steps that were taken to recover from the incident and return the affected systems back to an operational state. User will also want to confirm that the systems are functioning as expected. User may want to include additional monitoring to look for any future related activities. Once the incident has been contained and system control has been regained, incident recovery can begin. As in the incident response phase, the first task is to inform the appropriate human resources. Each individual involved should begin recovery operations based on the appropriate incident recovery section of the plan. The immediate determination of the scope of the breach of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information and information assets is called incident damage assessment. Incident damage assessment can take days or weeks depending on the extent of the damage. The damage can range from minor to severe. System logs, intrusion and detection logs, configuration logs, and other documents as well as the documentation from the incident response provide information on the type, scope, and extent of damage. Once the extent of the damage has been determined, the recovery process begins. The process involves the following steps. Identify the vulnerability that allowed the incident to occur and spread. Resolve them. Address the safeguards that failed to stop or limit the incident or were missing from the system in the first place. Install, replace, or upgrade them. Evaluate monitoring capabilities if present. Restore the data from backups. Restore the services and processes in use. Continuously monitor the system. Restore the confidence of the members of the organization's communities of internet. Stage 6. Lesson learned or building an incident response team. After recovery stage, users need to hold their lessons learned meeting after the incident has been taken care of. This stage is completed by the information security officer or other executive originally notified of the incident. As part of the report, it not only includes the reporter's information as described earlier, but also need to note the following items by the formed team. This includes date and time at which the incident occurred and date and time at which the incident was discovered. Type of incident. Type of incident can include, but it is not limited to, inappropriate use, denial of service, unauthorized use, unauthorized access, espionage, probe or scan, fraud or hoax, malicious code, that is worm, virus, other, misuse of system internally, misuse of system externally, theft of data or other. Technical impact can include, but is not limited to, loss or compromise of data, system downtime, damage to systems, other organizations' systems affected, financial loss or other. Current status. Current status can be an ongoing investigation, a pending investigation, or a completed incident investigation. Types of data. This can reference their data classification structure and note what type of data was affected by the incident. Sensitivity of the data. This can be low, medium, high, critical, or unknown based upon predefined levels. Actions. This is a summary of current actions being taken on the incident. Source of the incident. The source of the incident is described, including host names and IP addresses of the identified source. Description of the incident. This includes a description of the incident and how it was detected. User also wants to describe what happened as a part of the incident. These details can be assisted in the eradication process. Resources affected. The resources affected by the incident are listed, including the host name and IP address of the company assets affected. This area should tie into their business continuity and disaster recovery plan to determine the proper recovery plan. After completion of these information, the database assists in producing a formatted report entitled as Security Incident Report.